There's a good chance many of you are watching this because you're into true crime, you've checked out all the top unsolved murder lists, and the Suzanne Jovin murder is pretty much in every one of them. And there's a good reason for this. You've got a super intelligent, popular co-ed from Yale University. She's written a thesis on Osama bin Laden. She's dropping it off in the afternoon. And then she's telling friends in the evening time she's tired. She's been up all night writing this thing. She wants to get some sleep. And then 20 minutes after that, she's found dead. She's 2 miles away from campus, and she's stabbed 17 times in the back of the head and neck, her throat slit, and no one can figure out what happened. Well, this was in 1998. This is 20 years ago. So if there's ever going to be a textbook case of how not to solve a murder, this is what we're talking about. Before I continue, I just want to let you guys know I'm not exactly a YouTuber, and I got a ton of material I want to get out to you, and I've written it all down, and I don't want to leave anything out because there's a lot to cover. So I've decided to switch over to an audiobook style format. But before I do, I want to personally thank you for participating in my GoFundMe campaign and for watching my video. And I want to tell you personally that this case can be solved. It absolutely can. So let's dive into it. There's this misconception that the murder of Suzanne Jovin has gone unsolved for so long because of lack of evidence, or that this somehow was the perfect crime. Absolutely not. I mean, we have the tip of the knife that killed her. It was lodged in her skull. We have a Fresca bottle with Suzanne's fingerprints on it and the partial palm print of someone else. We have fingernail scrapings. We have multiple witnesses who saw a couple arguing at the crime scene, multiple witnesses who saw a mysterious tan or brown light-colored vehicle at the crime scene, and we have the crime scene itself. You even had famed forensic expert Henry Lee volunteering to do a crime scene analysis and recreation. Some of you might recall Henry Lee from the O.J. trial. He now has an entire forensic institute named after him in West Haven. Anyhow, the police turned down his offer. But if you follow this murder in real time, as I did, you know all the above was revealed in dribs and drabs over 20 years. There's a good chance there's even more evidence we aren't being told about. Sure, some of it was sent to the local crime lab, and I'm sure they did their best, but again, this is 1998. These days, because of genealogy, DNA testing is all the rage. Yet, here we have evidence that could solve a gruesome murder, yet the state of Connecticut has steadfastly refused for 20 years to get it tested using modern technology. This is insane. Look, I know no person's murder deserves any more attention than any other. I know states have an enormous number of unsolved crimes in general, and they have a limited budget. I understand that spending a big chunk of their budget on one case is not fair. I get that. And that's even more reason why I'm doing this campaign. If we are not spending the state's money, if we are sending the evidence to a state-of-the-art forensics lab instead, if we are not tying up any of the state's resources to do this, if, after all that, the state of Connecticut fails to accept our generous offer, we will know if they are truly trying their best to solve this so-called cold case. Okay, so that's the forensic side of things, or CSI, as we say now. Equally botched was the investigation itself. There are a whole lot of people who saw something, tried to say something, who were totally ignored. So what happened? Well, basically, everyone panicked. If you've ever lived in a big city like New Haven, as I did in the 80s, as a matter of fact, I lived on the same street as Suzanne Jovin, you basically learn how to stay in your lane, what streets to walk down, what parks to hang out in, and what time of day is best to do all this. This was a Yale student essentially killed on the Yale campus. This was not supposed to happen, and the timing couldn't have been any worse. This was December, the time when kids are making their final decision on where to apply to schools. The last thing you want is for kids to not feel safe, that no place in New Haven is safe, even Yale. To make matters worse, because Suzanne had lived in Germany, this was not just national news, but international news as well. Yale needed the New Haven police to produce, to calm fears. The mayor of New Haven was in the spotlight. Back in 1998, there were no cameras in every street corner. You didn't have a walking army of people carrying cell phones able to record stuff. Rather, you gathered up all the usual suspects and asked them what they heard or saw, what the word on the street was. You used your gut. You made hunches. In this particular case, the hunch was that a knife killing meant this was a crime of passion. Suzanne must have willingly gotten into a car with someone she was seeing. They got into a fight. He killed her. but the person she was seeing, her boyfriend, was out of town. Strike one. Okay, maybe she was having an affair. Even better, maybe she was having an affair with a professor. Okay, what professor? How about that guy? The one we saw on TV last night offering her a tribute. So the police drove undergrads around insisting everyone knew about this affair. It's useless to try to cover it up. Typical police bluff, dead end, strike two. Problem is, the police had, for reasons nobody can explain, leaked the name of this professor to the press. I've heard people speculate the mayor's office signed off on this because they assumed this would ease the panic. We know who did this. Trust us. You can now feel safe again. And it worked. Everyone just assumed the police had evidence against this professor, even though they hadn't even gotten around to analyzing any of the evidence at this point. The fact there was no affair meant the police had now boxed themselves into a corner. They had a suspect, but no evidence or motive against him. No matter, we'll just change the motive. We'll just let everyone assume we have evidence. As this lunacy went on for more than a decade, I could talk straight for a month and just scratch the surface of how insane this non-investigation was. And the reason I know is because this professor was a childhood friend of mine. This was around the time I was helping law enforcement go after scam publicly traded companies. I was active on message boards such as Silicon Investor detailing all this. I knew what real investigations were supposed to look like. Thankfully, after watching the New Haven police repeatedly walk into the same brick wall, Yale finally got shamed enough to hire their own investigators, Annie Rosenzweig and Pat Harnett, both highly reputed, both desperately wanting to solve this crime. Problem is, as I learned only recently, they were encouraged to suggest avenues of investigation, even plead for them, but they were powerless to actually pursue them. That was the job of the police. Though, to their credit, even though they were not really supposed to talk about their work, Pat famously called the professor, quote, Richard Jewell with a PhD. Richard Jewell, as you might recall, was a security guard whose name was leaked to the press as the Olympic Park bomber back in 1966 in Atlanta. Apparently, the FBI found it suspicious that after finding the bomb, he actually did his job, that is, risked his life to help others evacuate. They did eventually catch the bomber, thankfully. Now, personally, I liken the professor not to Richard Jewell, but Richard Kimball, the main character in the old TV series, later hit movie called The Fugitive. Good movie, by the way. It starred Harrison Ford, and Tommy Lee Jones was nominated for 7 Oscars, and Jones won for Best Supporting Actor. Anyhow, Dr. Richard Kimball comes home to see a one-armed guy killing his wife. Kimball gets wrongly convicted, escapes from police custody, and becomes a fugitive. He needs to catch this one-armed man before the U.S. Marshal pursuing him catches him. Anyhow, my main point here is that this was never about clearing someone's name or embarrassing the New Haven police or shaming Yale for just wanting to, quote, put this murder behind us. And it's not about that now. Rather, it's all about actually trying to solve it. It's about bringing justice to Suzanne Jovin. And again, as you will see, we can solve it. We will solve it. We have to. Obviously, this is a GoFundMe campaign. DNA testing is expensive, and there's a lot here to test. As you'll see shortly, there's a ton of stuff to go over. I expect there to be lots of leads to follow up, and the need to contract with the right people if I or others can't do it ourselves. I've already put 20 years of my own time, effort, and money into this, so I'm invested in this for as long as it takes. If I don't do this, if we don't do this together, who will? If not now, 20 years later, when? A huge thanks to anyone who feels likewise and steps up to contribute. Okay, so let's now solve it. Onwards to part 1, the murder.